The man everyone watches isn't the fastest. He isn't the strongest either. When the hunt begins, younger hunters disappear into the trees long before he does. Yet whenever food is shared around the fire, he always seems satisfied. His shoulders are broad. His stomach pushes slightly against the animal skin wrapped around his waist. Standing beside the others, he simply looks bigger, not taller, just heavier. If you met him today, you might even wonder if he's overweight. That raises an interesting question. Could someone like him really exist tens of thousands of years ago? Or is obesity something that only appeared after supermarkets, fast food, and office jobs? Most people answer that question almost immediately. Ancient humans hunted every day. They walked everywhere. Of course they stayed thin. It sounds reasonable. The problem is, human biology tells a more complicated story. Your body has never treated fat as a mistake. It treats fat as savings. Every extra kilogram is energy that might keep you alive when food disappears. That instinct didn't appear recently. It was built over millions of years, long before anyone planted crops or counted calories. So if storing fat helped people survive, why weren't prehistoric humans enormous? The answer begins with something every hunter understood better than anyone else. Finding food was never guaranteed. The human body is surprisingly good at storing energy. Give it extra food, and it quietly saves some for later. That ability helped our ancestors survive winters, failed hunts, and difficult seasons. The strange thing is, storing fat is easy. Keeping enough extra food around to build a large amount of fat is much harder. Food didn't arrive at the same speed every week. Some days ended with a successful hunt. Others ended with empty hands. A large animal could feed a group for days. Then there might be a long stretch where finding food became much more difficult. The seasons mattered too. Summer and autumn could be generous. Winter often asked a different question. How long can your stored energy last? This didn't mean people were constantly starving. That's another myth. Many hunter-gatherers lived skilled, organized lives, and understood their environment remarkably well. But having enough food and having endless extra food are two very different things. To become truly obese, the body usually needs a long period of eating more energy than it uses, month after month, year after year. For most mobile hunter-gatherers, life kept interrupting that process. A cold season arrived. Animals moved elsewhere. A hunt failed. The group traveled. Food changed. The body saved energy whenever it could, then spent it again when conditions changed. This is one reason archaeologists rarely find strong evidence of widespread obesity among prehistoric hunter-gatherers. The human body already knew how to store fat. The world around it rarely stayed predictable enough for large amounts to accumulate. And that's where the story becomes interesting, because some people may have lived in places where food arrived much more reliably than we usually imagine. Not every prehistoric landscape looked the same. A hunter living on an icy plain faced a very different world from someone living beside a rich coastline. Some places were generous. Rivers filled with fish returned every year. Shellfish covered the shore. Animals followed familiar migration routes that experienced hunters could predict surprisingly well. Life was never easy, but in the right place, food could become far more dependable than most people imagine. When that happened, the human body did exactly what it had evolved to do. It stored the extra energy. That's why archaeologists don't think body fat was impossible in prehistoric times. In fact, it would have been expected. Healthy adults needed body fat to survive illness, recover from injuries, and, for women, support pregnancy and breastfeeding. Completely lean bodies weren't the goal. They would have been risky. The real question is how much fat a person could carry. That's where the evidence becomes much quieter. Researchers have found no convincing evidence that obesity was common among mobile hunter-gatherers. If it happened, it probably happened to individuals rather than entire communities. A skilled hunter who consistently secured more food than others, someone living in an unusually rich environment, an older person who no longer joined every hunt, but still shared in the group's meals. Those situations could happen. They just weren't the normal rhythm of prehistoric life. The image of an entire tribe filled with overweight cavemen belongs in cartoons, not archaeology. At the same time, the image of every prehistoric human, looking like a modern marathon runner, isn't accurate either. Real people usually lived somewhere between those two extremes. Just like today, every body was a little different. For thousands of generations, people followed food. Herds moved. Fish returned with the seasons. Fruit ripened for only a short time before disappearing again. If one place no longer had enough to eat, the group packed their belongings and kept moving. That rhythm lasted far longer than most people realize. Then something changed. Instead of following food, people began bringing food to them. The first farmers didn't wake up one morning and invent agriculture. It happened slowly. Wild plants that people gathered every year became plants they deliberately protected. Seeds from the best harvests were saved and planted again. Villages appeared where camps once stood. Some families could fill storage pits with grain that lasted long after the harvest was over. Food no longer depended entirely on today's hunt. It could wait for tomorrow, then the next week, sometimes even the next season. That changed more than people's diets. It changed their relationship with food itself. A poor harvest could still bring disaster. Droughts still happened. Famine never disappeared. But years with successful harvests created something prehistoric. Hunter-gatherers rarely experienced long stretches of reliable calories. Not everyone benefited equally. A failed harvest could ruin one village while another prospered. Some families controlled larger fields than others. Some leaders and wealthy households had access to far more food than ordinary people. This is where history begins, showing us people whose lives looked very different from the hunter-gatherers who came before them. Being well-fed was no longer just good luck. For some, it became a sign of status. If you walked through a hunter-gatherer camp 40,000 years ago, you probably wouldn't see anyone who looked like a modern office worker after years of overeating. That image belongs to a much later world. Most people carried only the fat their bodies could build from the life they lived. Some years they would look leaner, some years healthier. A difficult winter could erase months of weight in a surprisingly short time. Life simply didn't stay the same long enough for most bodies to keep growing heavier year after year. That doesn't mean every person looked identical. Just as people today naturally come in different shapes, ancient humans did too. Some were naturally broader. Some carried more body fat than others. A few probably became noticeably heavier when food was unusually reliable. Those people existed. They just weren't common enough to represent an entire way of life. The version of obesity that fills hospitals today belongs to a completely different environment. One where food is available every hour of every day. One where many jobs ask us to sit more than they ask us to move. One where our next meal is usually a decision, not a challenge. The human body didn't suddenly change when the modern world appeared. It simply found itself living in conditions it had never experienced before. So, could an ancient human become obese? Yes, it was possible. It just wasn't the normal outcome of prehistoric life. Most of our ancestors spent their lives balancing opportunity with uncertainty. Every successful hunt could be followed by days with very little. Every good season carried the possibility of a difficult one waiting just ahead. Their bodies adapted to that rhythm. Ours are still trying to. If you want to see more videos like this, consider give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button.